over YouTube.
YouTube.
Me imagino que... Oh, we're live.
Okay, Anthony.
Good afternoon and welcome to the first in a series of talks that deal with the United States and its impact on Chile, organized by American Cultural Studies Program Diplomado de Extensión, Departamento de Lingüística, Facultad Filosofía y Humanidades, Universidad de Chile. We focus on issues related to the culture and the history of the United States from a Chilean point of view and from a critical point of view. We are happy to welcome Marc Cooper today. He's an American journalist, radical reporter and writer and retired professor, who is also an honorary Chileno, since not only has he spent years reporting on the events throughout Chile's history, he is also married to a Chilena. My name is Anthony Rauld, and I coordinate the American Cultural Studies program, along with Margarita Zúñiga, who is also here with us today. Margarita?
Good afternoon, and I welcome Marc Cooper. We're also joined here today by some of our students from the current generation of the program, but also from past generations. Welcome and thanks for connecting. We're also joined by a couple of local special guests, including history professor Celia Kazan from the History Department of the Universidad de Chile, Pascal Bonnefoy, who is a journalist, professor at the Instituto de Comunicación e Imagen, Universidad de Chile, and contributing writer to the New York Times. Mariela Carrasco is also with us today. She worked for Universidad Católica Silva Enríquez and holds a degree in American Cultural Studies. Professors Kazan, Bonnefoy, and Carrasco teach classes on African American history, American journalism, and cultural studies, respectively, in our program. Thanks for being here, Anthony.
We also have a surprise guest with us today, Tim Frasca. He's also a journalist. Tim came to Chile in the 1980s to report on the social movement and the uprising against Pinochet, and who loved Chile and her people so much that he stayed until 2006. The students, professors, and the special guests will be asking Marc some questions later on. We will also take some questions from YouTube. I guess we're on now. Let me introduce you to Marc. Marc Cooper is an award-winning journalist, author, and professor who has reported on culture and politics from across the US and around the world for 50 years. In the early 1970s, he lived in Chile and worked at the Quimantu publishing house, and then later as the translator for President Salvador Allende. He left Chile 8 days after the coup under the protection of the United Nations. His early interest in journalism actually began in the mid-1960s when he published an underground newspaper at his public high school, which earned him 2 temporary suspensions. After that, he attended California State University in Los Angeles, California, but was expelled from the system in 1971 by the then California Governor Ronald Reagan for his activities against the war in Vietnam.
It was that Cooper came to Chile and began a rich journalist career that led to publications in dozens of journals, magazines, and newspapers, including Harper's, Rolling Stone, Playboy, The New Yorker, the Los Angeles Times, and The Guardian, among many other publications. He was a special global correspondent for The Village Voice from 1989 1994, and was a staff writer for the Nation magazine from 1994 until 2008. Marc was also a founding editor of the Huffington Post, where he served as a front page writer and editor during the 2008 election cycle. Marc also has a long career in broadcasting journalism. He was the executive producer and anchor for Radio Nation from 1995 to 2005, which was broadcast on more than 100 public radio stations, Cooper has also produced and reported television documentaries on the wars in Central America for PBS Frontline, CBS News, and the Christian Science Monitor. Anthony.
Marc has published 3 nonfiction books. His memoir on Chile, Pinochet and Me, was an LA Times bestseller. In 2001, Marc joined the faculty of the USC Annenberg School for Journalism. And he was promoted to full-time associate professor in 2006 and retired as professor emeritus in 2015. He currently publishes a weekly politics newsletter called The Coop Scoop. I love saying that, The Coop Scoop, and lives with his Chilean wife in Vancouver, Washington. Please help me welcome Marc Cooper to our humble diplomado.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Anthony. Well, it's my pleasure to be here. When I lived in Chile, I spent many wonderful moments at the American Cultural Center, as a matter of fact. I also want to recognize immediately, because I know I'm going to get distracted by the topic here. I want to recognize immediately Pascal Bonnefoy, who I can say from here in the United States has probably been the most important link between Chile and the United States in terms of information for many years now. And it's an incredible service that she provides. And thank you, Pascal. And I also want to say hello to my friend Tim Frasca, who I'm responsible for bringing him to Chile in 1983. Where we were wonderfully cheer-gassed in the Cementerio General and many other places. And Tim and I were born more or less at the same hour, way back when the dinosaurs roamed the earth. In terms of my talk today, I'm going to be making a lot of references to Chile, not to pander to the audience, but because they're authentic. My experience in Chile was clearly one of the most formative and traumatic, but informative and educational times of my life. It was a privilege to be where I was and to see what I could see. And who knew that it would prepare me so well for the era of Trump, because the United States and Chile politically have nothing in common and have much in common. It's a very, very strange set of circumstances. As we sit here today, 4 days from the election, I can say without reservation that the political scenario here in the United States is almost precisely the same as it was in Chile on the eve of the plebiscite in 1988. We don't call it a plebiscite, but it is. This election has turned into one which is basically a yes-no vote on extending Donald Trump's tenure another unknown number of years. I doubt it would be just 4. So that is just kind of the general atmosphere. There are people who, I will disclose for the sake of the argument that I am not affiliated with either the Republican or the Democratic Party. But there are people in the Democratic Party who are legitimately and honestly enthusiastic about their candidates, but they in fact are a minority in their own party. The primary candidate, Joe Biden, was nominated in a strange primary process that we have here. He was nominated precisely not because people particularly thought he was great, but thought he would be the best candidate against Donald Trump, because he was among the most well-known, the most experienced, and the most moderate. And there was a debate, and there's a continuing debate, and there will be a continuing debate inside the Democratic Party as to which direction should it grow in, especially in this electoral period. Should it be reaching out to the center, to white moderates, to older people who are disgusted with Trump, to suburbanites, or should it rely on young people, and especially young people of color, new voters, etc.? I don't think that debate has been resolved. We can get into this later. My personal view going into the election was the one that discounted the value of trying to speak to disgruntled Republicans and the center, etc. As we are nearing the vote itself, I've softened quite a bit on that position. Think that while I'm not particularly comfortable with it, it's probably the one that works the best. And we will probably have a result like we had in Chile. That is to say, many of us, not all of us, some of us, are going into this election with our eyes wide open, the same way we were with the plebiscite. That, first of all, most people, only until, I would say until this week, probably a majority of Democrats believe they were not going to win the election because they're still traumatized from 2016 and they live in fear, in shock. And there's a whole discourse behind that we can get into. I think they finally have come around to understanding that Joe Biden, barring an intervention by God, will win the election on Tuesday. And he will probably win with a comfortable majority. What exactly Donald Trump is going to do, and is he going to resist? Is he not going to leave the White House? Is he going to challenge us in the courts? Certainly to some degree. How successful he will be, I don't want to venture a guess, though I will, which is I don't think he will be successful, though I wouldn't rule it out. I don't think he would be successful because the alignment of forces in the United States right now are really disfavorable to him, not only at the level of popular opinion, but also at the elite and institutional level. We have a sell-off going on Wall Street that's been going on for this week and continues today. And that sell-off is due to the fear. It's finally, the impresarial and investor class has finally realized that they really can't make much money if Donald Trump allows the pandemic to continue. So they've kind of decided to go the other way with him, some of them. Also, the situation with the military is not at all comparable with Chile. The military, honestly, here does not have any political involvement, shows no desire to have any. It's the last thing on earth that they desire. That's not a factor at this point in our history. Maybe it will become one. I doubt it seriously. Donald Trump has been such a catastrophe in every respect, not only in the political respect, but in the moral respect, in a human respect, in the civil respect. And he's been so grossly incompetent that it boggles the imagination. When his political epitaph is written, he will get none of the plaudits that Mussolini got for making the trains run on time, or the phony, we know the phony and false plaudits that Pinochet got for supposedly laying the foundations of a great economy, which I think you're still enjoying the greatness of, last time I checked. So he doesn't have much room for maneuver. So I am, on the one hand, quite certain that he will lose the election. I'm relatively certain that he will take some meaningful efforts to overturn the results. And I'm reasonably optimistic that he will fail at that. I also believe that the country is at an unbelievable moment of crisis and confusion. The pandemic is now at its greatest strength this last week. It's worse than ever. We're heading towards 100,000 cases a day in the United States. We're experiencing about 1,000 deaths a day. Some epidemiologists think that in the next 6 to 12 weeks, that number can go to 3,000 a day. Simultaneously, the President of the United States campaign right now, his central campaign issue right now is that you don't have to worry about the pandemic. It's over. Come to my rallies where you have thousands of people without masks. And, I don't want to be glib about it, but I understand it because of Chile. I have friends who say, well, how can 40% of a country support a man who's such a fool, who's so stupid, who puts Mexican children in cages, who does this or that? And I said, I've been in countries where 40% of the people support a leader who throws people out of helicopters. Kidnaps their babies and tortures their wives and children and their husbands. Why should I be surprised? So I can be thankful to both the Chilean right wing and for my reporting career to the Salvadoran right wing and the death squads, where I spent a lot of time in the 1980s. They've given me a perfect understanding of the mentality of Trump supporters. There is certainly a matter of degree, there's a matter of context, there's cultural differences, but generally speaking, unfortunately, I understand the phenomenon. In the United States, just to give you a little bit of background, how did this happen? And I think the short answer is that really, since the end of the war in Vietnam, it's really since 1974-75, the economy of the United States for the overwhelming majority of the people has stagnated. The real wages are essentially the same as they were 45 years ago, or 55 years ago, as the case may be, right? Somewhere like that, 45 years ago, real wages. The period from roughly 1980 to the present saw the greatest transfer of wealth upward from the bottom to the top of the society in the history of the world, with billions and eventually trillions of dollars trickling upward from the working class and the middle classes to what we now, and what you know very well in Chile, is essentially an oligarchy. And we don't use, it's funny, the American media only describes foreign oligarchs as oligarchs. We never refer to our own oligarchs as oligarchs. They're just businessmen or job providers, but in fact, they're oligarchs. And Donald Trump would like to be an oligarch and pretends to be an oligarch. He probably isn't. He probably owes more money than he's worth. His net worth is probably zero. But he's certainly a friend of oligarchs. but mostly he's a friend of himself. To look at this government as a revanchist government is one that is like with Pinochet, that had, it had to crush a revolution. It had to crush the people. It had to make that point ideologically. Trump gives lip service to that, and he does act on some of his authoritarian impulses, for sure. And he is a threat, and he has eroded the democratic institutions in the United States and the faith in those institutions. But he's not ideological. Donald Trump is perhaps the single most self-referential, selfish, tunnel vision person on earth. It's only about what benefits him. And he doesn't do a very good job even of covering that up, of pretending to be otherwise. It's been funny this last week. He's really realized for the first time, I think, that he's in trouble. I don't know if he's quite grasped the thought that he's going to lose the election. I think he has. But he knows he's in a lot of trouble. So he's got a frenetic campaign this week of doing 3 or 4 rallies a week in the Midwest, where it is 0 degrees on a good day this time of year. And everywhere he goes now, he complains. It's really been funny to watch him on television. He goes, he says, "What am I doing here in Erie, Pennsylvania? I don't want to be in Erie, Pennsylvania." And he's talking to people from Pennsylvania. And then, of course, they applaud, which really makes you wonder about, the state of the world. The point I was making is that since the Vietnam War, real wages have stagnated. The country has been deindustrialized to a great degree. Most of industry has gone overseas. We've turned mostly into a service economy with low wages, extremely high property values, a housing market that is out of reach for most people, a rental market that is now becoming out of reach for most people, which is hard to believe. Higher education is, the universities themselves have discredited themselves by being greedy, by raising tens of millions of dollars and investing that money mostly in buildings and in a new class of administrators, rather than reducing tuition or hiring more professors. They're little businesses, or in the case of big universities, they're big businesses. And if you want to go to one of them, back of the envelope, depending whether you're going to live at home or what the deal is, you have to figure that for the 4 years, you're going to need $250,000 to get through college. And if you don't have it, you're going to have to borrow it. And when I was teaching, I had many, many graduate students who were $100,000, $150,000 in debt. The graduate program itself was $100,000 for 2 years, and students would just take a loan for the whole thing, and they'd graduate into a volatile job market, having to pay over $1,000 a month for the next 30 years, just in repayment of their student loan. While this economic stagnation was taking place, the Democratic Party, which theoretically is closer to the lower half of the country than the Republicans, theoretically. It's our liberal party understood in American terms, which means slight center left, supposedly. I would not characterize it the way I characterize it as center, or center right. But as the center-left party in the United States, it did have a history of working closely with organized labor and et cetera. Basically, in shorthand, The Democratic Party abandoned the working class over the last 40 years, not really paying much attention to it, and instead turning its eyes toward the technical class, mostly IT, high tech, which they relied upon for fundraising, and they relied upon for political base. This left a lot of people out in the cold. And so simultaneous with that, since the 1960s, and then in fits and starts, we've been experiencing a cultural revolution in the United States that's continuing, which is a continuing, I mean, I'm using very general terms here, but it's basically continuing liberalization of society, though recently some of it has taken on some authoritarian aspects as well. But it's mostly a liberalization of society in terms of sexuality, gender, etc., race. In that sense, the country moved forward. And then we had the sort of miraculous election of Barack Obama, who to a great degree, first of all, he was an incredibly good candidate. Second of all, there was also a great vote for him to get rid of the Bush era, just like we have a vote now for Biden to get rid of the Trump era. Obama made lots of promises, most of which he didn't keep. Whether it was his fault or that of the system is another debate, probably both. But the point is that you had then, and here's the point, you had a chunk of a white middle class, white working class that was working class, but in its youth made enough money to be have a middle class existence, even though they were workers. Okay, workers here were paid well through the 1950s and 60s. They were unionized. They bought houses. They bought little boats. They bought cars. Their kids went to the university. And now, with the stagnation of the last 40 or 50 years and the abandonment of the Democrats, the white working class found itself a victim. At least it felt itself a victim. It was a victim of the economic situation for sure, but there was no political force. There was no political leadership to channel or to capitalize on that discontent of the working class and direct it towards some more progressive solutions. Instead, it was left to fester. Well, you throw in a scoop of racism that's always present in our society, and the backlash to the Obama presence. There's still a percentage of the population that could not believe that a Black man was president and never wanted to see that again. And you also have a reaction to this white working class to the cultural changes in more artistic and creative urban classes. And then you have the African American population that really has seen some progress, certainly since the civil rights movement in the 1960s. You have a Black man who was president. The sort of overt discrimination and Jim Crow that characterized the United States for a long time really is not present. But Black Americans, African Americans continue to be, as a group, have secondary citizenship. They just do not have the economic power or the political power to compete and find themselves not always, but to a great degree, find themselves in a difficult position. And of course, you are all aware of the abuses that Blacks have suffered, and not just Blacks, at the hands of the police, depending on what city we're talking about. We have no national police. We have something like 5,000 separate police departments. So in some small cities, the police departments are the major revenue generators for the city, right? So you had this sort of great dysfunction at the time of the 2016 elections, where you had millions of Americans on the right who felt unrepresented, and you had on the left and among minority communities, people who were also disappointed with what happened or had not happened under Obama. Hillary Clinton was a terrible candidate. Whatever one thinks of her, I don't think much of her. But even if you do, even if you think she is fantastic, I think I just think that if she had a real interest in, a stronger interest in serving the country than serving herself, she would have known that she was politically toxic. Even if it's unfair, you know, I think it was only partially fair. But even if it's completely unfair, and even if she thinks she's a victim of a horrible slander, to quote my president, it is what it is. That's the reality she had to deal with as a candidate, and it cost her the election. I'm not going to get into, unless you ask me, I'm not going to get into a big discussion of the Electoral College and how that works in the United States, other than to say that it is a system that makes the 1980 Constitution of Chile look fantastic. We have a number of structural elements in our republic that allow for a dictatorship almost of the minority. And that's what we're probably going to face after the election. The Senate is a radically undemocratic institution, allocating 2 senators to each state, regardless of its size. So the 40 million people in California have the same representation in the Senate as the 1 million people do in Wyoming. It's just mind-boggling. The Electoral College, to some degree, reflects that disparity. Not completely. It's more equitable, but it's still not equitable. And we have no central election authority. The elections are organized by the Secretary of State of each state, and then they're implemented by the counties. So we have thousands of entities in this complicated bureaucratic pyramid to count the votes. So I see that I'm taking longer than I thought, so I'm going to cut this short in a few minutes and look forward to your questions, because I know that I've given you only the most superficial glance at this. But I do want to sum up exactly where we're at. The election will take place on Tuesday. There could be 3 or 4 days of real suspense of knowing what the actual totals are. It could be much longer than that in some states. The election could effectively be over by 10 o'clock on Tuesday night, or it might not be over until January after it goes to the Supreme Court. Today, this I don't want to come off as being glib, but I want to be objective. This lunatic who's in the White House said that, with no irony and no joking, he said, boy, the Supreme Court is not going to let Joe Biden win. Now, I know that most of you are not students of American history, but theoretically, the courts don't decide elections in the United States, except they did in the year 2000. But even that had its nuances, though they did decide that. Elections don't go to the Supreme Court unless you take them to the Supreme Court. The danger that we have is that the court now has a 6-3 right-wing majority, and it's a hard right-wing majority. They're not even thoughtful. They're just partisan. And it's as I tell you, I have trouble believing it. The position of the Republican Party now, in more than I think it's 300 or 400 lawsuits that have already been filed in the different states, basically comes down to one issue. You should not count the votes that have been cast, which is pretty amazing. I mean, they've made voting very hard in this country, and there's always some excuse for it. This time there is no excuse. It's just that we don't want you to count the votes. And what they mean by that is, as of today, about 80 million people have already voted, because you can vote. In most states, you can vote early or you can vote by mail. So more than 50% of the electorate has already voted. Some people are going to mail their ballots too late. And I don't know if you know this, but the Trump administration has openly sabotaged the post office to slow down the mail, to the point where the Postmaster General, the man in charge of the post office, is facing possible criminal charges in the next administration. So there are going to be a certain number of ballots that will arrive, that will be mailed before the election, but will arrive after the election. Some states explicitly allow those ballots to be voted, to be counted, if they come in within 3 days, 9 days, or 14 days, depending on the state. Some states don't have any regulation. So what the Republicans are trying to do, among many other things, is to say, well, anything that comes in after Election Day, we just shouldn't count. It's amazing. So I guess what I'd like to say as a closing thought before I take questions and have a sip of what looks like wine but isn't. Maybe it is that this is the most perilous 83 days this country has faced, because the president is going to lose, and the president says he's not going to recognize his loss. And that's where we're at. And I will also say to you, I can say this to Chileans, because Chileans understand this. As traumatized as Chileans were by the coup and by the dictatorship, that spirit of activism and of engagement by Chileans in politics never disappeared. It's taken a fall, and it's gone up, and it's gone down, and there's more apathy than there used to be, and yada, yada, yada. But on the global scale, Chileans are still in the top 10 percentile of people who are engaged politically and actively. We're in the bottom 10th percentile. We don't have the institutions of opposition. We don't have the institutions or the traditions of opposition There's millions of people in this country who've never seen a march by union members. There's millions of people, like almost everybody, who has no idea what it means to be a socialist, though there's been some revival of that in the last number of years because of Bernie Sanders, even though it's a very weak brand of socialism. But nevertheless, for the United States, it's a big deal that anybody would even say they're a socialist. So all of the, I'm now going to end with what I wanted to say at the beginning, and I forgot. The greatest, I think the greatest parallel that we have to Chile right now is that just as the events in October of last year in Chile, as you Chileans put it, it was not about the 30 centavos, but the 30 años, right? Really what we see here, the crisis we see here, is that the confluence of the pandemic, which is extremely important in the point I'm going to make, the confluence of the pandemic with the rise of the Trump administration and now the fall of the Trump administration has brought to the fore all of the inequalities, all of the flaws, all of the injustices, all of the mythology, all of the bullshit of the last 40 years and arguably of the last 400 years, right? So there's no magic bullet on the horizon. Hopefully, Trump will be defeated. Out of that will come a government slightly to the right of Patricia Elwin in 1990. That's what we expect. But at least we might have a better guarantee of rule of law. And then I wrote this just yesterday, the crisis is not over. At that point, because of the way American politics work, the Democrats, even if they win the Senate, will have a year and a half to make all the radical changes they need to make to put the country back together, or they will also fail. I say a year and a half because we have elections every 2 years. And in the by-elections and the parliamentary elections, in the off years, generally the ruling party loses seats. So if the Democrats take back the Senate, which they probably will on Tuesday, they could easily lose it 2 years from now. So, and then when the campaigns begin for the Senate, there's no more politics, there's no more legislation. And that takes 6 months. So really, you've got about a year and a half to get things done. And I am not optimistic about that. We'll see. But that doesn't depend on the goodwill of Joe Biden. It depends, unfortunately, and I say that with some regret at age 70, it depends on the will of the people. You know that in Chile, you know that from your own experience. You had, 25 years of rhetoric from the Concertación and, some kids running through the turnstiles made a much bigger difference than all of that blah, blah, blah. So the American people have to decide whether or not they're going to fight this pandemic. I'm pessimistic about that. Whether or not we're going to make the economic changes we need to make in order not to reach socialism, but to feed hungry people right now and to provide them a roof when they're evicted because they can't pay their rent. So we're in a bit of trouble. On that happy note, I see the floor to you.
You'll be now taking questions, okay? All right, so let's begin our set of questions with Professor Pascal Bonnefoy from the Instituto de Comunicación en Imagen, Universidad de Chile, who, as I said earlier, also contributes to the New York Times as a writer.
It's not fair because Pascal probably knows more about the United States than I do, but go ahead.
No. Well, hi, Mark. Well, first of all, much too generous your words at the beginning.
No,
And yeah, it's kind of depressing, the whole scenario that you depicted, even though we're all familiar with it, but it is quite depressing. And I have several questions, but I'll start with just one and then go back to them. Let's see which one. Well, you've mentioned a couple of times that, well, and everyone has seen that Trump has said that he's not, or he like toys with the idea or insinuates that he's not going to respect the election results.
right.
And he's going to take that to the Supreme Court, or he's also encouraging people to protest on the street. And my question has to do with that, not necessarily specifically what's going to happen on election night or when the results are in, which I want to hear your take on it, but about that like ultra right wing that has been emboldened throughout these years with Trump in office, because it's always been dormant. I mean, it's always existed, right? Just like very extreme racists have also existed. But to see these guys, dressed for war on the streets and armed to the teeth, saying, we're gonna defend this president, etc. Something that in other normal countries they would be like immediately
Shot.
or at least imprisoned, detained. But I mean, what's going to happen with that, like ultra right wing kind of paramilitary groups that are, have remained dormant, and now with Trump, they've kind of come to the surface, and they're not going to go away. I mean, beyond what may happen on election night or beyond this election, they're not going away.
Well,
what's your take on that?
Yeah, let me add to your question. Let me load up your question a little bit more before I answer, which is, isn't it also true, Mr. Cooper, that now, isn't it also true that they're going to be very active under a Biden administration? And not only that, they're going to be extremely active because to be completely frank about it, they're going to have a Black woman vice president as the boogeyman. And it's going to be all about, do you want, Kamala Harris to be president? Because this guy's going to die, right? And if he doesn't die, she's going to be president in 2024. So the answer to you is I have no idea. I'm not completely, through some personal friendships, etc. I'm not as far from those groups as one might imagine. I mean, I don't monitor them, I don't follow them, etc. But I'm aware of them, and I know some people who are involved. And there's a number of them, of these groups in the city I live in, which is right above. I live 10 miles north of Portland, and there's a river between us. And it might as well be like the Mexican border. It's like two different countries completely. My fear is that in the next few days, right before, during, or after the election, there might actually be a terror attack from one of these groups. That is to say, a bomb attacking a line of voters, something really horrifying. I certainly hope not. These groups are, it's going to depend on the will. It's going to depend on the will of the Biden administration and of the Justice Department as to whether or not they're going to take this seriously. It's very difficult to regulate because of the power that states and municipalities have. So it's very difficult for the federal government to outlaw much of anything because state law is in the way. Many of the states are sympathetic to these jokers. It's not a stretch to say we've seen lots of evidence that it depends, but in some cities, the local police are very close to some of these folks and might even be the same to some degree. There might even be an overlap. I know this sounds pompous and pretentious, but you, Pascal, have enough contact with the United States to know that I'm not being a false patriot when I say that Americans do take freedom of speech pretty seriously, not as seriously as they should. They take it pretty seriously. And, does showing up at a state house with guns in your hand, is that part of free speech? I would argue no, but a lot of people would argue yes. So it's a political decision, right? Now, it's interesting because the Trump FBI, the director, which he now wants to fire, and the director is a longtime right winger, but he's a lot more honest than Trump. The FBI and other law enforcement agencies in the United States have clearly identified these right-wing militias as the greatest threat to peace and security in the United States, right? It's not about Muslims or Black Panthers or Antifa. It's about these guys. And you tell me it's a political decision. The ground is fertile for this because there has been a shift in public consciousness in the last few years about guns in general. Not a great shift, but some shift. So there's a little bit more running room when it comes to regulating firearms. There is a certain amount of greater consciousness about the threat of these folks. But this is something that you, as a journalist or as a citizen, this is really one of the 3 or 4 things you really have to keep your eye on over the next 5 years. Because this could dissipate, it could stagnate, or it could grow. I'm going to bet on grow. But I'm usually wrong, so it doesn't matter.
Thanks, Mark.
Okay, can we go to the next question then? Celia Kazan, who is a professor from the History Department, Universidad de Chile. Celia, please.
Yes, well, it's a fascinating discussion. You're leaving me ready to cry as an American, and but I guess maybe that's the only thing one can do these days other than vote. And I have a comment and then a question, and of course, it's Pascal, I have many questions, but I just like to say, I think that the lesson for Chile right now, as Chile writes a constitution, is to remember how even the most sterling example of constitutions, the American Constitution of 1787 that was crafted by these brilliant founding fathers, was not able to withstand the pressure of a madman like Trump. And that one has to keep in mind that you can't assume that the person holding any of the offices will be reasonable. And so, you really have to make it airtight and not assume there will be decency, because you sometimes don't get decency. But the question I have for you, Mark, I think that one of the problems in the United States, from my point of view, is that the press has become very fragmented because of the rise of cable and podcasts and, of course, social media. And we don't all listen to Walter Cronkite at 6 o'clock every night the way Americans did. And so everyone is listening to very different stories and a very different take on things, sometimes radically different, right? Black and white, night and day on the same event, right? There is no COVID, everyone's dying of COVID. And so, I think democracy, it's supposed to be about many voices. You know, we're not all supposed to be thinking the same thing. That's not what you're looking for. We want diversity, plurality, debate, discussion, different opinions. But one of Biden's challenges, I think, when he gets into office is somehow a need to reconstruct some kind of story or some kind of thread, or let's hope it's more like a rope, that can hold everyone together. And, you know, with shared values, with a shared history, some sort of narrative that can bring people back and away from this very fragmented world that has a lot to do with the press. And as a journalist, here finally is my question. And as a journalist, which you are, and I'm only a historian, so I'd like to ask you what you think the press can do. What will be the role of the media once Biden is elected, we hope he will be, to, you know, help create some sort of a narrative that can, you know, bring people back to a center and have them think that they're in one nation in some way, or that they share certain values. And what's the role of the press? Trump thinks the press is very important. He blames you for everything.
He loves the press.
They are important. So what should the press do? How can the press help?
Trump loves the press. Trump made himself with the press. This is an act that he puts on. He spends all of his time looking at the newspapers and magazines, cutting out pages that have his name on it. Well, you asked a lot of questions. Let me just try to answer them quickly. In terms of the Constitution, I would actually argue that you're right. In the case of the United States, though, there's another side to it, which is obviously the Constitution of the United States has many flaws from its beginning. However, I would argue that it is actually the strength of the Constitution and of the institutions that derive from it that have kept Donald Trump relatively out of the business of dictatorship. The institutions are battered, the institutions are unjust, the institutions are flawed, but they're strong enough. They have resisted Trump to a great degree. Not that they've resisted him, they've survived him. Some of them may not, but we'll see. The most important question here, just in terms of micro politics, immediate politics, is the future of the Justice Department. If the Justice Department can be rectified, that would be a great step forward, because that's the most dangerous of the institutions. And it's the most dangerous tinkering that Trump has done. In terms of the media, again, I have a somewhat different view. I don't miss Walter Cronkite. I grew up with Walter Cronkite. I became a journalist because I hated the media, because I hated its uniformity around the war in Vietnam. I hated the way it covered the civil rights movement. I hated its arrogance. I hated its distance from ordinary people. I hated the language it used. I hated everything about it, and I probably still do. There's been some very outstanding reporting, as we've seen, from the two leading newspapers in the United States, the Washington Post and the New York Times. They've also failed in some respects, but generally they've done a pretty good job. But I think there's just a fundamental issue. The press is not coming back, by the way. And that single narrative that you're looking for is not coming back. It's incompatible with the society that we have right now. The society itself is too atomized and too fragmented to be saved by, a Walter Cronkite. Besides, nobody under 40 is going to watch anybody who's like Walter Cronkite. In fact, anybody under 50 isn't going to watch anybody like Walter Cronkite. I'm also a little Pollyannish still on the issue of the digital media. We're only 25 years into the digital revolution, which is going to change the world more than the printing press did. The printing press in its first 25 years, you could have never guessed where it was going to go. So I'm not going to make a definitive ruling on the state of the media and of the strange democratization of media. It's been more democratized in some ways. In some ways, it's been more monopolized. But I'm more comfortable with an open system like this than one that's controlled by a couple of monopolies. You know, people said to me, and this is a very sarcastic statement, but I'll make it. People have said to me, well, God, what would have happened in Vietnam? What would have happened if 1965 there were as few White House, as few correspondents as there are today, right? Because in Vietnam, you have a press conference in Vietnam in 1965, you have 150 American correspondents. In a competing situation today, you have 3 or 4. And my answer was, if we had had fewer reporters at the time of the war in Vietnam, we might not have had a war in Vietnam. Because for the first 10 years, the press promoted the war almost uncritically, the first 7 or 8 years. And it was only when it was absolutely obviously a catastrophe that the media rectified its course to some degree. I don't trust the big media. You know, it took the Washington Post and the New York Times, it took them 3 years to work up the courage to call the torture program that George Bush implemented torture. They would not use it. And there's a long discussion on the record between the 2 editors of the papers, between Dean Baquet, or not Dean Baquet, it wasn't him then, but between the then editors of the New York Times, the Washington Post, why they wouldn't use the word torture, because they said it had become a politicized word and they don't want to take a political position. So I'm not that, I don't think it's up to the media. I think it's up to the people, okay? And the media can follow, because people can create media now. And if you have a social movement or you have a civic force that is organized and is fighting for defined political goals, they can create their own media. Also, I would say implicit in your question, and not criticizing you for this, this is absolutely normal in a way, but implicit in your question is a sort of passivity. That is that it assumes that the citizen's job is to sit and to watch somebody tell them the truth. You know, you can get the truth if you want it. It's easier now than ever. There's more information available than ever. If you want to get to the bottom of something, you can do it. So I would say that the new media landscape actually puts the consumer of information into his or her proper historical place, which is to be proactive rather than to be a passive recipient of information that somebody else has processed for you, in our case, for profit. And that's why our news media exists. Our news media doesn't exist to inform people. It exists to make money. And that influences the way they handle the information. So I'm not worried about the media. I don't like it. And right now, social media, in the up and down of social media, right now we're in kind of a valley. We're in a dark period, but we're only 25 years into it. Give it some time. It may get a lot worse or it may get a lot better. I don't know. But it doesn't mean anything if you don't have people organized, okay? And one of my favorite similes comes from a writer named Lewis Lapham, who wrote a book called Hotel America. And his thesis was that Americans, and I don't think it's just Americans look at politics as room service in a hotel. It's like, which waiter is going to bring me the food I really like? instead of when am I going to go into the kitchen and make it, or when am I going to tell them what to do, etc. So there's a lot of passivity, and I don't want the news media to tell me. I don't need their direction. I know that's a really unsatisfying answer, but it's true.
Okay. Can we then go to the question by Mariela Carrasco from Universidad Católica Silva Enríquez?
Hi, Mark. Hi, everybody.
Hi. Hello.
Hello. So thank you for your insights and perspectives about the current situation in the United States. So my question has much more to do with America's future role in the world. So given this political and social crisis, can the US still be considered as a shining city upon the hill?
I don't know. I'll ask you that.
My opinion is a little bit questionable.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I mean, I don't think, I think that it's clear, we've seen from recent surveys that the prestige of the United States internationally is at a low point, okay? How we regain that prestige or what that prestige means is a much more complicated question. And the question of the United States in the world is not being dealt with in this election, okay? It's not on the table. Americans never put it on the table because they assume that we're the center of the world. And if we're the center of the world, then there's really nothing to talk about, is there? We're the indispensable country. We're the, example of everything that's good and right in the world. I'm concerned because the international situation is quite volatile, as you know, and the Trump made one good promise that he didn't keep. Trump swore that he would be a non-interventionist and would withdraw the United States from all these foreign wars. Now, that's something I actually am in favor of. And he also, thumbed his nose at NATO. I think, and now, of course, the Democrats are saying, well, we're going to return the United States to its previous position of greatness, and we're going to rebuild NATO and all this kind of stuff. And my question is, well, why would we rebuild NATO? Why are we in NATO? Why does NATO exist? Are we really going to continue as an empire at a time when the 40 to 50% of the population does not have $400 to pay for an emergency, okay? The United States is not a rich country. Half of the people in this country are poor, and another quarter of them are under tremendous economic pressure, okay? Most of the country is poor by our standards, at least, and even by Chilean standards. We don't quite have a La Victoria or a, I don't even know if La Victoria still exists. It must. But we don't have it quite at that level, but close in the countryside in some places. Yeah, that's really all I can. That's really all I can say about that. You know. So,
okay.
Better answer, but I can't.
Okay, thank you. I think what I want to give Tim a chance to ask Mark a question. Tim and Mark know each other, and they share this experience they had in Chile during the 1980s. Covering what was going on in the country. And so Tim, go ahead, Tim, you're on.
Well, thank you for this great opportunity. It's been fascinating to listen to.
Hello, Tim.
Hi. Mark, I was going to ask you a question, which I I now realize more about Chile, which is why have the Chileans who like to imitate and copy things from here, why haven't they figured out how to steal elections better?
They tried.
Had an election which was transparent and people counted the votes, handwritten votes in public. It's like they're behind the 8 ball here. Come on.
That's
We really
right.
we have a lot to teach them about how to rig elections and suppress the vote. But that's not my question.
Okay.
You know, the going back to your parallel about the plebiscite and about the mass movement stimulated by the students jumping over the turnstiles, what do you think it would take here? And I know your overall feelings, not from this presentation, but in general, about the likelihood of people really massing to defend their democracy or their interests. Do you think we're going to witness a long period of just people taking it, sort of parallel to the post-plebiscite dissatisfaction with the concertación that took 30 years to warm up?
Right. It's a great question. I wonder if I should expose you as the author of your blog, which would give more context to your question. I think I will, because it's consistent with my view. Tim does a blog called, I hope this gets translated correctly, called Biped Twilight, which
Ocaso y caída de la raza humana.
Exactly. Mostly la caída. What do I think? You know, to be frank with you, it's the most difficult question I face every day. And I wish I could just switch it off in my head, because I'm old enough now at age 70 and I've done enough that I don't feel I have a responsibility to do anything productive anymore. So I am very pessimistic about that. I know that on the one hand, it's the only thing that I encourage people to do. You see my newsletter, I tell them this every week. But do I really think it's going to happen? I hope so, but I don't think so. I think that there will be, to use an arcane term like the objective conditions, I think the objective conditions are such in the country that no matter how you cut it, the next 10 years is going to see a lot of civil unrest. Okay, that's a generic term for just a lot of shit in the streets, right? But I don't know that any of it's going to make any sense or that any of it's going to be organized. I actually go back to Jean-Paul Sartre, who many, many years ago, sometime around 1965, opined that the United States population would only mobilize when there was a great disaster like a nuclear meltdown or the grid going down or running out of gasoline or Netflix going off the air, something like that. Is that too pessimistic? You know, there is a counter to that. You can read a whole list of people doing things, right? And it's true. There's hundreds of local organizations, some national organizations, who are involved in really important work. You know that, and they do it, but it fails to get to the next level, right? It just never quite makes it to the next level of real cohesive resistance. And there's all sorts of reasons why that you know as well as I do. So I think it's sort of baked into our history. Now, I do want to go back to one thing that the professors asked me that's relevant to you, to your question, which is, I do think that while the Constitution, as I said, the Constitution, the institutions of our republic have held together enough to prevent dictatorship at least to this point. It's also quite clear that you could do away with those institutions without much trouble. And that's maybe an understatement. It would be some trouble. But I think that is going to be Trump's great legacy. I think Ronald Reagan's great legacy is that he legitimized greed. Greed was always around, but you weren't supposed to show it. And he's the one who brought in Gordon Gekko and yellow power ties and cigars and French cuffs and champagne and the celebration of opulence and wealth as a good. Trump's lasting legacy is going to be that he's created a block of constituents who are incendiary and irrational and dangerous. And that's not going to go away. I think they're going to get better mobilized than the other side is, but I don't know. What do you think, Tim? Oh, you can't hear me. All right.
Yeah, I hear you. I'm inclined to agree. I'm perhaps a little more optimistic just because I think that the conditions are dire and that people are ready to pop. Plus, the lines to vote this week have been really impressive.
Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah.
Somebody said, it's taking me 3 hours to get in to vote, but I've been waiting 4 years, so I don't care.
Right. Well, I don't want to be, I can't be completely pessimistic. I mean, I'm hoping, we'll see. And there is a lot of desperation. Also, there's a lot of, not to be a historian about it, but, radical change usually comes at times of rising expectations. And expectations are going to rise now. So Biden's going to be under a lot of pressure, I hope. Hope he can take it.
Okay.
Come on, man. Here's the deal.
I want to get, excuse me, but I want to get, really quickly, I want to get Susie Weissman in. Susie Weissman is the host of Beneath the Surface with Susie Weissman. And she's from she's one of the house as well. And so we wanted to give her a chance to ask Marc a question. And I'm going to ask, if you could keep it a little bit short, the answers, because we do want to get the students to ask their questions too. Susie, please.
Susie, you're muted.
Unmute. Hello, everyone. And I should also say I also have a Chilean connection, having been married to a Chilean for many years. In any case, I want to just be a voice of optimism, and Marc is probably going to laugh. But I think one thing is that we haven't reached the really impressive level that Chile has shown us over the last year. 2019 was an amazing year, and you saw this gigantic mass movement in Chile and all over the world against the status quo and austerity. And we saw it in the US too, but the difference is, and I think this is the weakness of it.
Where was I when that happened?
Well, you saw, gigantic movements against police brutality, and that's continuing. Diverse movements that, included whites, Black, Latinos. But I just think that, what's missing and is that there's, the labor movement has been decimated in the United States. And that's usually the backbone of any great movement. But we're in a much better position than we were before. And on the question of the armed militias and these groups and the really worrying growth of conspiracy thinking as expressed by QAnon followers who literally think that the Democratic Party is a cabal of child sex traffickers. And they seem to think that they need to defend children against the Democrats and that they're quite willing to move to civil war. But I think they're weak and they're small and they can be dealt with. So while I'm worried about the danger and the possibility of any terrorist attacks in the next period, I think Tim pointed to one thing that we should really take heart in, and that is that because there's been so much voter suppression, that we've seen people waiting all night now as early voting comes to an end, and something like 80 million people have already voted, and the election is days away. So I think there's it's not going to be on the Chilean scale. And I really was hoping to hear more about, this incredible plebiscite that made me giddy with happiness. But I think that in the US, there's a long road ahead, but I wouldn't discount it. I think that the Trump years and the Bush before it and Obama too failed to meet the pent-up expectation from so many people and so many young people who've taken to the streets and are organizing in all kinds of ways, and they shouldn't be discounted.
Well, Susie, I've known you longer than I've known Tim. Oh no, I've known you about the same amount of time, actually, almost to
79.
Well, yeah, you are an eternal optimist, and it's true that there was a lot of movement in the streets this past year, 2020, not 2019. There was, but what there isn't is there is not any cohesive, coherent national leadership that coordinates any of this, and until there is, it'll be an entertainment. The other thing that disturbs me as somebody like you who's been active on the left for the last 900 years is that we've seen in the last 10 or 15 years, whenever there's been an outbreak of protest in the United States, there's an immediate scurrying to make sure there's no leadership. And we don't want any leadership. And that is, as long as that persists, there won't be any leadership. And if there isn't any leadership, there isn't going to be significant change. And also, I think I can also tell you that we live in very different places. You live in Los Angeles. I live in the state of Washington, in Vancouver, Washington, a city of 250,000. There was almost no evidence of this general discontent that you refer to where I live. There was a demonstration of maybe 6 or 8 people in favor of BLM. And even BLM has its issues. BLM is not, that is something that we should discuss at some point, because BLM is not a real viable opposition alternative. It's a nice acronym, but it's unclear what's behind that and what significance it has. In any case, I'll keep it there. I hope your optimism is correct.
Thank you, Mark. I'm going to invite now the students. Catalina Quiroz is a student from the current generation of the American Cultural Studies Diplomado. And if I'm not mistaken, she's coming all the way from Chile, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, great.
So, yeah, we have most of our students this semester are all like in provincia, or many of them are coming or connecting from provincia, which is another great thing, that like a silver lining in with all this Zoom revolution. So Catalina, go ahead.
Thank you. I have 5 questions. I don't know what to ask. Can I ask all of them?
Yes. That's up to the company. Go ahead.
Okay. I think I'm gonna ask the most important one, because since I'm a Chilean, and this is very important for me to know your opinion. Do you think the country would be better off now if the coup hadn't happened? And do you think the coup would have been possible without the help or the intervention of the United States? That's my question.
Yeah, if Chile would be better off if the coup had never happened? That's, I would hope so. It would have to be better. I'm not sure what point you're trying to make with that, but because there's several, you can go in several directions because it's all speculative. But of course it would have been better off if there had not been a coup, no matter what happened. What was your second question? It was also about Chile.
The intervention, would the coup
would the coup have happened?
Yes.
Oh man, probably. I would say probably. I don't see why it wouldn't have. I think it may have unfolded in different ways, but I think the Chilean armed forces and the political forces behind it and the oligarchy really didn't need to be reminded by the United States that they had an interest in overthrowing the government. And they certainly had the power to do it. Did the United States help? Certainly. I think the coup would have happened even without the United States, but I don't know. I'm pretty sure it would have. At the time, immediately after the coup, I wrote that, and this was before there was the full revelation of U.S. involvement in the planning of the coup and the financing, etc. But my feeling at the time of the coup, immediately following it, was that the United States role was secondary. I don't know, Chileans might disagree, but I think it was secondary.
Well, there's that one detail, Mark. Apparently, Allende had decided to call un plebiscito.
That's right.
On the 11th of September. I think that might have complicated things, perhaps, for the coup plotters. And I think that, I mean, I get the impression that without all of the logistical support from the United States, it might have been perhaps more difficult. I don't know. I mean, I don't know what any.
No, don't blame us for your problems. Chileans are perfectly capable of doing terrible things without the United States, and the United States can do terrible things without the Chileans. I don't really, Anthony. I don't think the United States played a very important logistic role either. I think that. Militarily speaking, the coup was not a difficult enterprise. It was easy. And there was no significant armed resistance to overcome. The FACH didn't need the United States to know where the Moneda was to bomb it. The tanks got there without much problem. I think that the diplomatic support and the political support given to Pinochet by the Nixon administration immediately after and in the years following the coup was quite significant. But in the actual coup itself, I think the coup would have happened either way. Maybe at a different time. And I think that because Allende had decided to announce the plebiscite on September 11th, plans were changed and advanced and moved up. I think the original plan was to stage the coup on the 18th of September. I'm not sure. I think it was the September 18th on Independence Day. But they had to move it up because they didn't want him to announce the plebiscite.
Okay, great, thanks. Now we have another student, Paula Cuadra, who was a student in 2017 and 2018. And she has a question for Mark as well. Go ahead, Paula. And where's Paula connecting from?
Cajón del Maipo.
Del Maipo, okay.
Maipo. Cajón del Maipo. Hi, Mark. I would like to take advantage of your experiences around the world to ask for more perspectives of what we're living now in Chile. Based on your reporting on South Central America, South Africa, Eastern Europe, where different democratic transitions have been led, resulting in various degrees of success or unsuccess. What do you think the people of Chile and their institutions have to take into account in order to fully incorporate all citizens in a democracy? And how do you interpret our last constitutional plebiscite in the context of Chile's earlier so-called democratic transition.
Yeah.
Is there something peculiar about Chile's transition from the end of Pinochet onwards up to now? Is it two different things? Is it a continuum? Or I don't know, is there hope for change?
It might be my personal bias because of having lived in Chile and appreciated the Chileans. I also have to be careful because I've been married to a Chilean for 47 years, so I have to be careful what I say about Chile. I do think it's a unique country, and I don't say that because I'm just talking to Chileans. I think it is unique, and it's generally quite inspiring. Chileans seem to be indomitable. They don't give up, especially the youth. And, I think that the answer to your question is in your question. I mean, the Constitution or the new government and societal structures that you build need to be completely inclusive, and they need to be as democratic as possible. What I found most, I knew it was going to happen, but what I loved in the results from the voting last Sunday was not only that almost 80% of the population voted to approve the commission, but there was an overwhelming majority that want no politicians in the room when the thing is written. I think that's going to be your biggest challenge right now in the immediate future is how do you keep this process out of the hands of the 75 people who've run Chile since I was first there in 1970. I wish they'd at least change their names. I'm tired of hearing them. And now it's not them, it's their children. So you have this very encrusted political class in Chile that happens to be corrupt also. Corrupt both economically and morally corrupt. I think that my own view is that the parties of the Concertación lost all moral authority during their, from the first minute, really. And I'd like to relive that minute before this is over with Tim, because I think Tim was with me at that moment. Tim, were you? Tim, are you there?
Yes.
Were you with me? Were you with me when the morning after the plebiscite?
Oh, I know exactly that story that you're going to tell.
Well, in our Arriagada, right? well, we Tim and I went into the big march. There was a big march down the Alameda at the morning after the plebiscite. We had been up all night dancing in the street in any case. And there was a huge march. I don't want to overestimate it, but it was tens of thousands of people. It was spontaneous. And they were marching down the Alameda, and they had the most wonderful slogan, which was renuncia, resign, which was, of course, the right slogan. And Tim and I had laughed because there was a line of pacos, of police, riot police, standing in front of blocking the access to the, what was it, Calle Bandera, I guess, toward the Moneda. And Genaro Arriagada was standing on a Carabiniero tank.
Scholzen, it was Scholzen.
It was Scholzen?
Scholzen.
I thought it was Arriagada.
Okay, maybe both, I can't remember.
I think it was Arriagada from the Christian Democrats, was standing there with a bullhorn, telling people to go home, go home, go home, we won. And I said to Tim, okay, well, we said to each other, okay, we know what the next 10 years are going to look like now. These guys are going to make their peace with Pinochet and live happily ever after. So yes, your Constitution has to provide for everybody, and the primary thing is that we're going to come back to the questions, the hard questions I've been asked, which is you've got to create a constitution that guarantees the engagement of the citizenry. If it becomes a much better constitution and the people are reduced once again to being passive spectators, not much is going to happen. And I think that's the great dilemma we face as humanity. It's hard work to make a good society, and people usually don't have the time, the effort, or the desire to work on governing themselves rather than just existing and getting along.
Okay, we have another student, Brandon Collins is a current student of the Chilean Studies program, which is in its second year. And he has a question also for Marc. Are you there, Brandon, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Good afternoon, and thanks for your thoughts. And my question gets to the heart of, I think, what a lot of these things stem to, and that is money and politics. Donald Trump ran on the platform of "I'm going to drain the swamp," quote unquote, yeah, while representing, I think, the exact person or people that he was claiming to be against. And so how does that get rectified? Because on a fundamental level, the representatives that claim to be representing the common person of the United States, because of campaign financing and lobbying and money within the political system, and that plays into money in the media as well. But how do you clean up that system in order to rebuild a representation of what the normal American wants out of their society? And I think it goes to a philosophical level and a community level, like a lot of people have mentioned. And the community here in Chile and the individual mentality is a lot different. I think a lot of people in America are still stuck in this mindset of, if they're not already the brightest star in their sky, in their own sky, they're just one lottery ticket away from being, a millionaire themselves, or one break away from being, the super famous and super successful person that they always thought they could be within this American dream mentality. So my main question is, how do you clean up the swamp for real?
Good question, Marc.
It's a really good question to which there is no easy or single answer. I would say, let me address the philosophical thing first, because that's actually easier. The other, it's true that Americans have quite an individualist sense. That is the surreal moment. I don't know what it's like right now in Chile. I've heard conflicting reports, but right now in the United States, there are places where you can go where nobody is wearing a mask on purpose. Oh, you can go to a Trump rally with 5,000 other people in a closed room today, and nobody's wearing a mask, except the 100 people who are behind Trump, who are on television. They put a MAGA mask on them, but nobody else is wearing a mask. And I think that one of Trump's other great legacies will be, just as I said, as Reagan blessed greed as a societal value, Trump has brought the country to a point where the grand ideas of freedom and liberty have been reduced down to selfishness, which is sort of amazing. That liberty and freedom is now defined as nobody can tell me to put on a mask. And the answer is, well, yeah, actually, they should be able to. It's sort of amazing that we don't have a national mask mandate that Biden is just starting to talk about, which is also amazing. Yes, we have a swamp. The swamp's not going anywhere. Biden is a swamp creature. He's surrounded by swamp people. Here's an interesting note that you may not know, but look it up. During this election cycle, Wall Street has given more money to Biden than it has to Trump. Because they're perfectly comfortable with Biden, as they should be. There's a faction, a loosely organized progressive faction in the Democratic Party, including Bernie Sanders, that issued an open letter the other day asking or demanding or pleading with Biden not to include Wall Street people in his cabinet. He doesn't need them in the cabinet. He's the cabinet. He's there. He works for them. It's not the other way around. There is no short-term solution to getting money out of politics. I'm going to go back to what I was saying with Tim. And I sort of meant it in a semi-serious way when I quoted Sartre. I don't think we're going to have that type of change that would include getting money out of politics without some sort of external cataclysm. Or maybe an internal one, maybe a real economic collapse, but a real one. A devastating one. People are just generally speaking, except for the activists who are out in the street now and then, people are very passive, and they feel legitimately that they have very little power, that it really doesn't make much difference. One thing I can say about Trump is we have to give Trump credit, because Trump has energized and politicized the whole American people. Unfortunately, half of them have been politicized in the wrong direction. But the other half, or more than half, have been motivated by Trump and have been more engaged because of Trump. The question is, what happens when Trump is gone? And we saw with Obama that the big social movements that had congealed around Obama dispersed as soon as he was elected. Couldn't find them. Same thing happened with Clinton. Probably will happen here as well. Hopefully not as Tim said, as I said, as Susie said. The objective conditions are such that something radical has to happen. This cannot be sustained. Now, the dark side of that is that if Biden fails, which is probably more likely than not, if he fails, well, then we're back to where we started from, because then we have fertile ground for a smarter, better Trump to come along and capitalize on that disappointment. You know, it's what I think what Chileans may not know is, and this goes back to what I was saying at the beginning of the causes of this. Do you know that in the area where Trump won the election, which is basically 3 states, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, he won each one of those by 15 or 20,000 votes, very few votes. And they gave him the electoral votes to be elected president. You know that in those areas where he got the extra 20,000 and 30,000 votes, most of those voters had voted for Obama twice and then switched to Trump. So it's not a simple ideological issue of, oh, well, there are all these right wingers and they came out of the wood, you know, they came out of the woodwork and voted for Trump. No, you had working class people who had voted twice for Obama. And I guess they saw not much changed in their life. You know, I mean, Obama, I give Obama credit for many things. I think that the Obamacare, while grossly insufficient, will still be the first step that will get us to national health care, and that should be recognized and appreciated. Some of the stuff that he tried to do, go ahead. Anthony.
No, finish, Mark.
No, I'm just rambling. Go ahead.
Okay, so we're going to actually end with a question from Pascal. But before that, I want to ask 2 questions, and then you can figure out how you're going to answer them. But there's a question on the chat that has to do with young people. What was the role of young people in this election, or what is going to be the role
of
young people? And then I have another question on actually Facebook, right? Because we really wanted to get a question from Facebook, and somehow I got it from Un Pajarito. But I'm gonna give you this question too, and I'm gonna translate. But it says basically that Mark has said that that without leaders, without a leader, movements are not going to create change. Isn't it time for us to think about different ways or different forms of doing politics through these mass movements? Why can't these mass movements somehow create their own institutionality and
because they don't.
Okay.
Because they do not.
And then we'll have Pascal at the end too.
Yeah. Let me answer the first question first. The youth vote is, we have all these mysterious categories in the United States. We have the youth vote, we got the Latino vote, we got the Black vote, we got the white educated vote, the white non-educated vote, the suburban vote, the rural vote, the Black vote, the Jewish vote, the Muslim vote. Most of them are mythological. There is no such thing as the Latino vote. The Latinos in Florida are very different from the Latinos in Texas, and they're very different than the Latinos in California. Blacks, something like 11 or 12% of Black men are going to vote for Trump. Latinos, about 30% of Latino males are going to vote for Trump. So, these things do not break cleanly. Youth are wildly anti-Trump, and the indications that we have in the early voting right now is that the youth vote is very big. And youth usually get criticized for not coming out to vote. I don't know why people pick on them. Most people don't vote. The majority of Americans do not vote. Period, end of discussion. So, why pick on 18-year-olds? They're no different than anybody else. The youth vote is apparently very high this year. We don't know yet, but we look at at what we can see in the early voting, and it's very encouraging. So that's good. But then again, everybody's voting. The turnout this year is going to be phenomenal. It's almost going to be like a normal country. In terms of organizing without leaders, well, yeah, the person who asked the question is mixing up a couple of points. Of course, you should be creative in building new institutions. We really have to be creative, because let's not ignore the 800-pound gorilla in the room. We're talking about systems here. And I would argue without hesitation that the capitalist system is not working very well, except for a small percentage of people in the world. Socialism, as we know it, did not work. Now, some of us on this call are socialists, and we can get into arcane discussions about was it really socialism or not? Was it really communism or not? Well, yeah, okay, it's a great discussion. The point is it didn't work. And those models don't work. I don't think, I might be wrong, but I don't think that Chileans on the left really today, it was different 40 years ago. I don't think Chileans today on the left really want Chile to be another Cuba or another Venezuela. I just don't believe that for a minute. Because those countries are not democratic countries, and Chile is. And the Chilean leftists, for the most part, are real Democrats. And that's not always the case everywhere. So the very concept of socialism or of an alternative society has to be reimagined. We don't have models other than theoretical ones that we can look to and say, well, God, this really worked. You know, it was really great in Bulgaria in 1979, you know, or, you know, the East German DDR, man, that medical system was a knockout, you know, that's all bullshit. So we have to think of new systems. Now, I've liberated myself from that by not worrying about systems. I worry about principles. So I think that we need to move forward, and you need more democracy, more transparency, and more equality. And you move the ball as far as you can along that line without getting off that track. Because once you fall off one of those tracks, you're headed to an authoritarian society, whether it's on the right or the left. So I lost my train of thought for a second. That comes back to the question of leaders and leadership. Should you look for great, reverential, charismatic leaders? The answer is no. That's just to piss people off. That's one of the problems I have with Evo Morales, for example. My exposure to him and to his folks is that it seems a bit of a cult around him. That's not to say that some of his policies might have been beneficial, but it doesn't feel good. So I'm not arguing that you need to have a leader who commands you. I'm saying that you need leadership. That leadership can be collective. Doesn't mean that you need to have a president or an executive director or a comandante or a commander. It means that you need to have a decision-making structure that is efficient and agile and doesn't become self-referential. During the Occupy movement here in 2011, I went to a couple of the meetings they had as a journalist. And it was astounding. I mean, they spent most of their time talking about their internal organization and who was going to wash the dishes and who was going to take care of the kids and could you smoke marijuana or not. And it's like, well, okay, but what are you doing here? What's your political demand? What's your political impact, right? What is it that you want? What is it that you're asking for? And Chileans are pretty good at articulating that, right? I think. I think you've had a couple of charismatic leaders in the student movement the last 10 years, but they're not demagogues, I don't think. So that's what I mean by leadership. What I mean is coherence. What I mean is strategy. You just don't say, oh, well, if you don't have coherence and you don't have strategy and you're in the street, then you're engaging in an act of personal therapy. You're making yourself feel better because you think you're doing something, but you're not. You're not doing anything unless you have a direction and that energy is pointed somewhere to make some difference, rather than just saying, well, we are the difference. No, you're not the difference. You don't have any power.
Okay, Pascal, you are going to be the last question, and then we'll wrap it up. Pascal, go ahead.
I know it's late, so it's going to be very brief. Well, I think 4 or 5, maybe, yeah, about 4 or 5 months ago, it wasn't so clear that Trump would actually lose this election as it is right now. Well, I'm not sure, no, but I hope he does. But it seems to be in that direction. But since day one, since he took office, day one, there's been all sorts of information and leaks about wrongdoings, corruption, cronyism. I mean, tons of things, you know.
Right.
That didn't matter to anyone ever. That never made a difference. So my question is, how much, and particularly this year, there's been like revelations about his taxes or lack of, a series of things like day after day, week after week, but nothing has really been his downfall, I think, as much as COVID, as much as he has like mishandled the pandemic. So my question is, I mean, is COVID his downfall? Because nothing else has seemed to work. I mean, he's like immoral, you know, he's racist, he's
Well, I wrote a new
things, you know, so many things. Only COVID has done the job, so we can thank the pandemic.
In the newsletter that I wrote yesterday, it was titled "The Downfall," and I essentially said that he was beaten by COVID. Right? That's the shorthand.
So I didn't read your newsletter, but
no, I know that. He was beaten by COVID and by himself. Okay, nobody beat him. Now, I think that I'm going to be a little self-congratulatory here, because the day after he was elected, the day he was elected was the night he was elected was the day, was daytime in Armenia, and that's where I was in Armenia the day of the election as a consultant to a TV station. And they interviewed me because I was there to ask me about what was going to happen with Trump. And I said, they said, is America going to become fascist? And I said, no, he's too stupid. He's too undisciplined. He's too corrupt, and he will destroy himself. And I don't know how, and I don't know when. Now, I think one of the myths that's out there, Pascal, is that people say, well, he did this and nothing happened. He did this and nothing happened. He did this and nothing happened. I don't agree. I think that's all had a cumulative effect, and he has lost support. I mean, first of all, he gained no extra support, which is what he's supposed to. When you're elected with 46% of the vote, the first thing you have to do is expand your base, and he didn't. All he did was shrink his base. So all of the outrages he committed, nothing happened because nothing could happen, because he held state power, right? And we don't have a social movement that's in the streets. I mean, Susie disagrees to some degree, but I don't think that the streets, I don't think the resistance, as it was kind of laughingly called, I don't think the resistance had any effect on Trump's defeat this coming Tuesday, except for providing the voters. But they were going to come in any case. He was defeated by himself, and then he was knocked out by COVID. People got tired of him being in their life 24 hours a day. Okay. I mean, I don't know if you've been in the United States in the last couple of years, but it's Trump, 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 Trump all the time. And even I, as a political reporter now, I'm retired now, but it's funny because I know my own patterns. I get very excited at the very, very, very beginning, at the first little beginning of an election cycle. Like, oh, this is going to be great. A year and a half of fun. And then, election night comes and we cover that. And then I know usually by the time the new president is inaugurated in January, I'm not even paying attention, right? And now everybody's had to pay attention every minute of the day for 4 years and watch a man who is visibly crazy. I mean, if you don't see that he's visibly crazy and immeasurably ignorant and immeasurably unfit for office, then you're crazy. Then you're brainwashed. Then you're in a cult. Then you're living in a fantasy world. COVID knocked him out. And not only that, but as we sit here today in the final hours of the campaign, it's astounding. It's astounding. The whole strategy, if you want to call it that, of his campaign originally was to divert attention away from COVID and try and turn Hunter Biden into a boogeyman. Nobody cares about Hunter Biden. Nobody cares. And nobody believes that Joe Biden is an anarchist or a socialist. He's been around for 47 years and he's a moderate conservative Democrat, right? And everybody knows it. Anybody who's got a brain. So he couldn't satanize him. He couldn't, the whole Hunter Biden thing was screwed up by Rudy Giuliani, who's also insane. And people now have had it. So what you're seeing now is the COVID was the straw that broke his back. But it was more than a straw. It was like a big log that fell on his back. Because, and then I would say since March, really, or since the outbreak of the pandemic, everything that Trump has done publicly has worked against him. Everything. He was doing daily briefings on COVID. He had to stop when he said maybe we should inject bleach. And I say, that's enough of that. He went crazy to his debate. He looked like a fool when he got COVID and did his drive around the hospital, which was astounding. And now that he's having multiple rallies every day, violating the protocols of public health in areas that are being ravaged by COVID. They just happen to coincide with the swing states where he's spending this week. And it's like a death cult. It's like Jonestown, you know? You figure it out. You know, this is a very strange time to be having this discussion because it's like discussing what Chile is going to be like 72 hours before the plebiscite in 1988. You have no idea. I mean, I've got some idea, but you know, we're totally in flux. I do want to come back though to the major point, which is because it occurs to me all the time. Not only did I live in Chile, I also lived in Italy. Italians also tend to be somewhat engaged in politics, even though they keep winding up with the same government no matter what happens. But I sit here with my wife and I said, God, if this were, you know, Trump will announce something. I said, Jesus, if this were Italy, there'd be a general strike tomorrow, you know? If this were Chile, there'd be 100,000 students in the street by 6 p.m. tonight. And you don't have that kind of response here. You got smaller responses. I mean, there's protests for sure. But people look toward the government and say, what's it going to do for me? Oh, it's not going to do anything for me? Well, fuck it. I don't care. I'm out of it. All right? We'll see. We don't have much time. We've got a couple of years at the most because of COVID to either get serious or to continue to decline as an empire. It's hard to feed people and it's hard to subsidize healthcare when you've got 195 military bases around the world, all right? And $1 trillion a year military budget. unless there's a radical rethinking like that, I think we're headed for more decline and more civil unrest, and we'll see which comes first.
Well, the only thing I have to say is that I hope that Trump loses on Tuesday, loses the election. If he doesn't, if he wins the election, it's going to be like Condorito. No.
No, if he loses, if he wins the election, you have to erase the state.
Wins the election, it's going to be like. Well, I think that's a good point to end on. Thank you so much.
Yeah, my pleasure.
This has been a really interesting and fun talk, and thank you from all of us.
No problem. It's my pleasure.
Our American Cultural Studies. I'd like to thank also Celia Casen also for being with us, Pascal, of course, Bonnefoy for being with us, Mariela Carrasco. I'd like to thank Tim also for joining us. That was great too. And I would also like to thank Susie Weissman, who made a great flash appearance. I'd like to thank the students also for sticking around and hanging out and all the questions that you asked. Alvaro Gonzalez, thank you for the technical side of things. Claudia Flores, also thank you for the work, and Margarita Zuniga, of course, and everyone who was watching on YouTube, I guess. It wasn't Facebook. But thank you all. And I don't know if we should do like a virtual applause or something.
Send money.
We'll deposit to his account. So thank you guys, and we'll see you guys soon. Ciao, ciao.
Ciao. Thank you. It's been a pleasure.